This is Cody Claflin, and you're listening to the Matt Balaker Podcast.
Hello, good people. Today's guest is a farmer, father, bench press champ, entrepreneur. Please welcome Cody Claflin to the program.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you. We've been working on getting you on for a while, Cody, and I know a fair amount about you, but not really on the early days. So can you tell the folks out there where did you grow up, Cody?
I'm in a little town called Sheldon, Missouri. It's about 2 hours south of Kansas City. I'm pretty much cows and cornfields. That's pretty much the best way to describe it. About like most of rural America. My family, going back I would be fourth generation on one side and third on the other from a farming background. I've been in this area pretty much my whole life.
So you've been in Missouri your whole life. Farming's in your blood, or at least it's in your heritage. So what was like in your family? What was like the first generation of farmer?
Back then, we're going back about 100 years ago. That would have been on my mom's side, and they did a lot of hogs. Soybeans in this area really didn't come around until I think 70s, 80s. Wheat and some Milo. A lot of your broadacre crops, and then I'd say in the late 90s would have been early 2000s when my dad on my side, my father's side there, they really took off growing a lot of corn, and they're a vertically integrated farm. They've got multiple employees, and they've got rentals, they've got construction, they've very vertically integrated and diversified. So I've got a lot of background in a lot of different things.
And so for the city slickers out there, what is a vertically integrated farm?
That's where we do everything from start to finish. Not much is hired out on that farm. So we did our own trucking, do your own dirt work, do your own spraying, pretty much everything start to finish. A lot of farms will contract in, certain things, but we were big enough to justify doing all that in-house. Everything was handled in-house. You get better timeliness. Your employees, you have things for them to do the rest of the year. So you have a lot better control over what's going on in your operation.
So you have more control, more of a soup to nuts kind of deal.
Yeah.
I interviewed a friend who went to school in Montana, and he talked about how he played football there, but the kids who grew up on farms just had a whole different kind of strength. Like it wasn't gym strength. He called it farm strength. What say you? What growing up on the farm, how do you think gym strength is different than farm strength?
Definitely, and it's pretty funny because obviously, like, I'm not a small guy, and I go to the gym pretty regularly, and it's kind of funny when I'd show up and people would say, "Oh, well, you don't have farmer strength," and I'm like, I've probably got more farmer strength and experience than everybody standing here. So yeah, the two are different. You go throwing hay bales all day. Back when I was a kid, we actually did some small square bales. Typically now it's all large production agriculture things, but yeah, the two are definitely a little different. And I'd say you do, you get the stereotypical, the story of, kid waking up, crack of dawn and all that. And kind of the same a little bit. It's, but we've got technology, we've got air conditioners in our house. And I remember in college, a friend of mine, we got in a tractor and he's like, "Oh my God, you got a radio in here." I'm like, "Well, yeah, we're not a freaking I mean, I don't know what he thought, but he was shocked that we had radios in our tractors.
You don't have mules pulling it either. So there's been a lot of advancements. So what was your reality, Cody?
Yeah, 12-year-old, it's going to be a lot of cleaning, a lot of things that nobody else wants to do. And it's funny. I've always heard, the silver spoon in your mouth. I'm like, you dumbass, it's a shovel. I think I've actually got a meme floating around somewhere on Facebook of me holding a big shovel. And, everybody says, but, you do the dirty work, especially. And my son is 11. And he's learning that right now. He's actually painting on a construction project that we're doing, and he's with the employees right now painting. And I said, it's important that you learn basically from the young age. You learn every step. Cade helped me. For example, he helped me do some. We had a bunch of receipts, so we totaled up a job this morning. So really realizing what goes into the whole thing. So you're really opened. Your eyes are opened up at an early age to costs. It's funny. You asked that when I was about 12, his age. I had a teacher tell me I couldn't spend $1 million in a year, and I giggled because
I could do it in an afternoon.
Yeah, exactly. I said, and I mean, for most people, I'd already spent $1 million, by the time I was 21. You're really exposed to a lot of different things, even at an early age. You're exposed to what true work ethic is. I would say at a young age like that, you really do a lot of cleaning, and that reason is you learn what maintenance looks like. That's really where a lot of that starts.
I see on Instagram where a lot of athletes, they say it's about the work. What does that mean?
You well, you don't really have an option. You're the boss's kid. You hear that a lot, but I mean, I was there the same amount of time, and then you realize that some people, it shocks them when you say that you've seen 100-hour work week, and I've done that multiple weeks, or a 24-hour day, or just you learn what it takes to get things done, and there's nobody else. There's no cavalry. You are the cavalry. And so, but I've had to actually learn to back off. And as become a dad myself, and, you know, have a family and a wife. And there was a time period there where my wife told me, she said, I didn't get married to be this lonely. And she was right, and so I guess my family and my experience just didn't know any different. That's what you do to get it done.
Yeah, how is farming life different for you than maybe your dad's generation?
I would really wager that a lot of my generation puts a lot more focus on family time. During my dad's generation, there was a lot of consolidation, and we're probably getting ready to see that again in the ag space because the margins are thin, very thin. You've got the trade wars going on. You've got a lot of your GMO, non-GMO discussions. You've got different trade things. The weather is, I'm not going to step off in that shit pool of global warming or climate change, but we do have more sporadic and more variable weather than we used to. And so that's something that's changed. And then also with the sheer amount of data, we know that the little differences and the variances in putting in a crop, they amplify themselves, exponentially. So that the data is there to make bigger changes, the dollars. My little farm, so we had like the way we farmed, we have a total, and then I had like my own acres, and in my own piece of my little farm, the total dollars you're managing, if you looked at it like a portfolio manager, if you will, I was handling a portfolio of about $8 million, and so even my little operation. So I think one thing is just the sheer dollars that a farm's handling now is much different than my dad's generation.
It's running a big business. I want to learn a little bit more about your high school days. I know you have a passion for wrestling. Did it start then?
You're gonna laugh. I was actually a big basketball player. I'm big into wrestling because my kids do wrestling. I went to Oklahoma State, in college, and everybody was asked. They said, "Would you do wrestling?" I said, "No, but I think it's a great sport." I was actually a really good baseball player, and then the school that I moved to when I moved in with my dad, their big sport was basketball. So really, that was what I live, eat, breathe, slept, and was basketball. And I'm actually just got hired as our junior high basketball coach. So
congratulations, coach.
That's really fun. I'm really looking forward to that.
What position did you play in high school in basketball?
I was a point guard. Very stereotypical Steve Nash style point guard.
Steve Nash. So were you at Oklahoma State? I think it was Marcus Smart. Did you overlap
Absolutely.
with it?
Yep. Right.
Okay. So how does your point guard game compare to Marcus Smart's?
Well, he's a little taller than me, but not bad. But that's we would it was pretty common to even whereas one morning in high school you kind of asked about that period. My dad broke down. He was in a truck and he broke down about 30 miles south of us. So he called me and I went and got a list of tools together, got the tool truck, drove down there, helped him change a tire, got him back on the road, and I was back to school by 7. That's just what you do. You don't ask questions. That's just what you do. So that's kind of your mixture of farm life and farm life in school.
Yeah. So speaking of farm life in school, how did, I guess, some of the lessons you learned growing up help or hinder you when you're at Oklahoma State?
It definitely helps because I've always, even like during school and what I was learning, I was never without a job because I have actual tangible skills. And
what are those? I read about it in a book somewhere.
Well, the one I put the most use, and then I got my example for is welding. And when I don't know, it's been 20 years. I won't get anybody in trouble. But when you're working for the school, you can't pay people you can only get paid on a certain pay scale. So minimum wage was $5.85 when I was in college. But if they had to hire a welder and bring somebody in welding, they're probably gonna have to pay them 30, 40 an hour. So plus at the time. And so they said, well, if you can weld, well, instead of me working 10 hours a week, all of a sudden my timesheet got turned in as 20, 30 hours. And so that really, when you're making 585 an hour, you get bumped to 11, that was a big difference. And then I had free room and board. I lived at the dairy barn. And so I've always found opportunities through the work ethic that I was willing to do. And where I really got my start in college is I was working for a tech company that kind of worked in the agronomy space. And so I was studying it at school, and then I started working for this tech company. And that's when my first business started, is I was like, hey, I can go do this. And then that was really when this application of technology and all that was really getting started. And anyway, first weekend I went out and did consulting, and I made $20,000 my first weekend. And I thought, holy shit, I found something.
It pays better than double timing at your college welding job. So 20. Wow. What were you doing? And I mean, is it something you can disclose? Because I got a copy.
Yeah. So I was doing some consulting, and I was in the kind of a fertility space. So knowing how many nutrients that field needed. And also I was really efficient and putting together, you're in college, you got the labor force. And at the time, we didn't have costs like we do now. I had a brand new pickup and it cost 20 grand. So, you just didn't have near the costs. And I'd pay guys, $20 an hour to come help me. And they thought they were making a hell of a paycheck for the weekend. So anyway, I'd line up jobs and we'd go out and knock a couple thousand acres out in a weekend. And so I was working with the data side. And then I really seeing the value of where this data fits in agriculture. I didn't really realize it always came natural because I was about that age that it was kind of fitting. But at the time, looking back on it, it's funny because I spoke a few years ago, like 4 or 5 years ago at college. And some little shit told me that, well, you got into this when it first started. You're old enough. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. I'm only 30 years old. What are you talking about? Doing me like I'm an old man. And so, but that was really where I got my start. And I've sampled in 13 states, and I think I've covered somewhere around 500,000 acres. So I've been all over the place. I've sampled from Texas up to Minnesota, pretty much all through the Midwest. I've seen a little bit of everything.
You've seen a little bit of everything, and you've also started some cool projects. Can you tell us about Natural Solutions and how that came to be?
Yep. So that's where the soil sampling, that kind of got started. And then that turned into some other consulting, and then a seed business. I sold to other farmers corn and soybean seed. And then we did a little bit of drone work for a little while. And then in 2025 and 2020 and 2021, we were one of the state's first hemp farmers. And in 2021, I was the state's largest hemp farm. And through that, the company we grew for, they ended up filing bankruptcy. But we got a lot of experience in that space, and I've got a lot of connections in it. So that's kind of led to where we're at now is opening up our own line of smoke shops and kind of being in that space. And so it's not really winning or losing, it's learning. So,
yeah. I mean, how does growing hemp differ from soybeans or any other crop?
A lot more permitting. One of my favorite stories was we were getting spot checked by the Missouri State Highway Patrol the first year. And we had 11 ton, which if it had been a year prior, I'd be sitting in prison right now. But we basically had 11 ton of.
Thank you, Farm Bill.
Yeah, we had 11 tons sitting in my warehouse, debudded, dried in super sacks. And that highway patrolman walked in, and he had a bigger smile on his face than mine. And he said, man, a year ago, we'd have been tickled pink, getting ready to throw your ass in jail and having a good time. So anyway, that was kind of fun. I would say it was fun. It was, just to see the change and the acceptance in it. We had a couple employees at the time that they got pulled over on the way home, and of course their car smells like weed, and they're calling me, and pretty soon I'm on the phone with the sheriff, and we're all, it's fine. So that was probably the biggest hurdle, was the permitting and the stigma around it. Now that it's been around a while, also in some circles, I'm kind of known as the hemp guy. In Missouri, we had some legislation that was in that arena, and I had some legislators calling representatives, hey, do you have any advice in this? Because you're kind of about this just as much as more than anybody. So it's been interesting in that space. It is difficult to grow. I was one of the first people to actually do it by seed versus little transplants. And And we did that at scale. And so there are a lot of hurdles with that crop and that plant that you don't see in the corn and soybean space.
What are some of the like agricultural hurdles?
Well, for one, the only recommendations that come from fertility and how to actually feed the plant come from Uncle Joe's pot smoking uncle that grew it in a closet for 20 years. Growing a single plant in a closet is a hell of a lot different than growing at field scale. So a lot of what I learned from it was trial and error. I'd throw a little nutrients at it here and I'd watch it respond. And it is a fascinating plant in that it will show a deficiency faster than another plant. So as soon as something's not right, it's telling you right off the bat. And so it really takes paying attention to it. It's because you don't have a booklet. It's been illegal for 50 years. So, anybody that knew anything about it's dead. So there wasn't a really good template on how to do that. And that was obviously a challenge. But if, you kind of understand plants, it's like, okay, well, this is how it's responding. And so we're just going to goose it. We're going to feed it and let's see what happens. So that's the biggest thing. You don't have herbicides that are approved. A lot of people don't understand that there's an approval process for herbicides, insecticides, and anything that you're going to spray on a field. And most people don't understand how hard weed control is when you don't have these herbicides and residuals control. Organic weed control is hard. And so now there are starting to be some things that are approved, and it's been a learning process quite a bit, because how do you know when a plant's been, illegal, prohibited for 50 years? So
right. Yeah. What are some of the biggest lessons you've learned through this process?
So there's a misconception that it needs to be planted, late, like June, July. The problem is that when you're planting it there, you're combating the weeds, and you're trying to grow at the same time your weed cycle is growing at the same time. We had kind of a happy accident, and in Missouri anyway, everywhere's a little different, that we had some seeds germinate in like January and February. And then we had a massive frost. It got down a nice frost, a freeze down to like -14. And it stunted the plants. But then by the time we hit March and April, our plants were about 3 foot tall, and they were already shading out your weeds. And that is a form of weed control, is weeds, because then weeds don't germinate. Well, most people said that you can't plant it in January. Well, it has phenomenal cold germination. So for us in our climate, you're better off to plant really early. And also some plants don't like being wet early in their root structure. And that was a big one we learned, is if you plant early, you have an established plant when we start getting our rains like we do in May. And so a lot of that was just trial and error, because everybody says, well, you can't do it. And I'm like, well, you can, because if you look over here on Exhibit A, it's working very well. So a lot of mine comes just from real world experience, because my textbook, it didn't work, but it does. So that's been fascinating.
So you don't have to plant too late, and some of the best things in the world are happy accidents. So
Absolutely.
I like that. I'd like to get your explanation of, in layman terms, Cody, like the difference between what people used to refer to as like marijuana, or like, THC producing plant, versus hemp.
Yeah.
Can you kind of give a quick summary from your point of view, how they're different?
Yeah, as an agronomist, you probably have to remind me of that from time to time, not to get too technical. So basically what you have is your THC. THC is an intoxicating substance, and that plant is going to create more of that. And what it is let's say you have an apple, and you have a red apple and a yellow apple. They're both a Granny Smith apple. They look the exact same, but they're going to taste differently. Well, that's more or less what it comes down to in the breeding side, is THC is going to get you high, and it comes down to a testing variance. Hemp is not going to create near the amount of that chemical. Does it have a little bit in it? It does. A very, very small amount. And so really that limiting factor is kind of a legal number that the government has applied, that if it's below this, then it classifies as hemp. But you can breed hemp to have other things like your CBD hemp, and CBD is a non-intoxicating substance, but that plant just creates a lot more of it. So let's say it creates a purple apple or a blue apple, and then your red apple is your THC. They're all apples. They're just different.
I like that. We're all apples, people. We're just different. Very,
Yeah.
very, very true in many aspects, Cody.
Exactly. And some people like their apples a little spotted, and that's fine.
They might pay more for it. Yeah. Good for them. I want to switch gears. When did you get into weightlifting, and specifically bench press competitions?
Yeah, so that was started in high school. I had a mentor of mine that was a father of a girl in my class, and he said, hey, you're pretty athletic and I think you'd like doing this. And so we kind of got in that space, and the rest is history. You get to be about that 16, 17 years old, and it's kind of fun to pick up heavy stuff. And so that's where all that started. And then of course it is helpful on the farm. You don't have to go get you don't have to go get something else. You can just walk over there and go pick that up. And a little bit of a safety thing, honestly, helps do your job.
So for people out there who are looking to increase their bench, what advice do you have for them?
The biggest one is to stay consistent and eat enough. Most people, they don't realize how much you have to eat to, you're going to be, when you get really strong, you're getting over 200 pounds. I'm 5'7", 230. It takes a lot of food. That's what we've talked about. I wouldn't mind getting bigger and all that. My wife said I'd better find something to support my food bill.
So is it just calories in, calories out, or is it counting protein, or what type of diet do you suggest?
Yeah, pretty much. I stick to pretty much meat, rice, potatoes, veggies, and probably a Monster. But I'm pretty partial to caffeine, but I keep it pretty clean, and that's just a general health thing. And people say, oh, well, you're not going to have some good blood pressure. You're not going to have this, or that's just a load of shit. I mean, you look at the healthiest people out there, they keep their food diet clean. They stay out of the middle of the grocery store, and they stay active. And also, to be strong. And I mean, you don't have to try and be super huge to be very healthy. I enjoy it. I like picking up heavy things. This is kind of a hobby, I guess, but that's just general health. It works pretty good.
And you brought up a good point. I think a lot of people can understand it. It's hard to practice, but you said stay out of the middle of the grocery store and eat clean. I guess, could you unpack that a little bit? Like, what do you mean by that?
Well, when you really look at a diet, which is kind of funny, people are going to be like, well, you're a farmer. What do you know about this? Well, all it takes is research, is processed foods. You really look at whenever people started really getting unhealthy, and it's when we started doing all this hydrogenated stuff and processed foods. And then what it really comes down to is there's not, I mean, when you, let's say you butcher a cow, familiar with that process as a farmer, you butcher the cow, you cut it up, here's your piece of meat. There aren't a lot of value add in between. So what do companies do? Well, we're going to package it and we're going to do all this shit with it versus we could just serve you a steak. Well, that's what happens in the middle. In the middle there is where all the bad stuff's added. So the cleaner you can keep it, that's just, you're better off. We've been around for millions of years and people ate food. What's a Pop-Tart? That's not food. It's a bunch of shit they shoved together and called it edible. And when you look at colorings and food colorings, and they have, a petroleum coloring or chemical, we're not meant to eat oils. And so, I mean, I guess, I don't know, some people call that being a little bit of a tinfoil hat. Well, I don't know. I'm pretty damn healthy for a 37-year-old. So.
No, it's working. And in terms of protein, that's always a tough go for people who are trying to get stronger. What protein sources do you recommend?
Yeah, I'm pretty partial to a First Form and Bucked Up. I really like their proteins. I'll have a couple of those shakes just to supplement and add into it, just because sometimes I just get tired of eating that much. Pretty much just chicken and beef. And it takes, to be my size, it's about 200, 220 grams a day, and pretty healthy in that range, so you're going to shoot for 40 to, depends on how many times you eat. I eat 4 times a day. So 40, 50 grams a meal on top of, and I think in rice is really good for you. So, I mean, I'm pretty dadgum healthy for, like I said, 37, and I got good blood pressure. And when I started cutting out, processed foods, and I started cutting out even just deli, there's a difference in your deli meat, your prepackaged meats versus the stuff you get sliced, the amount of nitrates that are in your prepackaged meat. I'll bloat 5-10 pounds of water weight, depending on, you just really start paying attention. When you get lifting, you start really paying attention to your food. And I've got a friend of mine that he's a gastro doctor, one of the best in the country. And he said, we probably needed to learn more about nutrition from bodybuilders than anybody. And I think you're really big pro bodybuilders, and the people don't need to get into that with the steroids and the insulin sensitivity and the growth hormone, but they are onto something on how your body processes food, and you can make it more efficient. So the more active you are and the cleaner you eat, the more efficient your body is in anyway. So I've really got into that, and not to get off in the weeds too much on it, but it's just a healthy lifestyle. You realize how much better you feel
Well, yeah, I mean, probably when you're in your teens and 20s, it's about looking good. And then when you're in your 30s and beyond, it's about feeling good. And I think like having a body that can move and be active will just make your, I don't want to say golden years because you're still young, but you'll be a lot more fun dad. You'll be a much better wrestling coach if you can move around and be relatively healthy. So good
Absolutely.
job. So I want to learn now. Now you've been called, what is it? The redneck Elon. You're a smart guy. You're an entrepreneur. You're always looking for the next thing. So what are you up to now?
Yeah. So, we talked about me farming, and last year we kind of had I'm not going to say a coming to Jesus meeting about, where the farm's going and all that. And I'm looking at the ag economy, and it's just not something that I was positioned to feel like that was in the long term where I wanted to go. And so, anyway, I've sold out I've got one farm left and I've liquidated, and we're going into affordable housing. And my rule there is if I wouldn't live in it, I'm not going to rent it. And I feel like that's a lot more landlords should take that view. And so I want to provide nice homes. And if I get a chance, I'm going to try and help people work towards home ownership. That just makes a healthy community. And if not, then at least I'm gonna rent nice properties and really contribute. And so what we've found is where the home values have gone since COVID is that I can build cheaper, I think, than what I can buy homes that were built in the 1950s for. So that's a much better view. I mean, we're slab on grade, 3-bed, 2-bath. That's a nice, 1,200, 1,300 square feet. I guess you're in California, so I don't have much relevance there, but here in Missouri, that's a nice home. That's a nice affordable home. It's nice space. It's nothing outlandish, but you're not cramped. And we're looking at an ICF build with a foam and concrete block. They're going to be very energy efficient, safe. We do have tornadoes. I know that's kind of foreign to you guys.
It's like an earthquake with a big wave in it, right? Is that?
Yeah, but you do know when the tornadoes are coming, you can at least stay home.
Yeah.
I've got some other friends out there and out where you guys live, and that kind of freaks them out a little bit. But, the Midwest is kind of nice. You got low cost of living. And so, but that's still where we're going to focus on. And then our chain of smoke shops. And my barometer there is, a lot of smoke shops. Are you comfortable with your wife walking in there? Some of them, they're not. I'm just gonna be honest. So that's what we're really after is something nice in that space. And I really enjoy that.
Yeah, I mean, MedMen, for all its faults, and there are many, and but it's a big, it was a big, cannabis chain in mostly California, but elsewhere. That was kind of their MO. Would your mom or your wife want to walk in? And they made them beautiful. But I'm glad you're applying that. And how, I mean, they're pretty different. Like, how'd you swing? All right, we're going to build, semi-affordable housing and smoke shops. Like, how's that work?
Yeah. So
I love it. I'm just curious.
Most people say, start your businesses and keep them in the right space a little bit, being diversified a little bit out of each other's areas. Because I've worked in some retail. So when we grew the hemp, we had our own kind of farm to table brand. So I do have experience in the wholesale and distribution space. The retail, I'm sorry, it's not rocket science.
You get something, you sell it.
Yeah, you got something, you sell it. It's, and somebody watching this is going to be like, that guy's full of shit. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, guess what? You're probably right.
Just don't tell you.
But
if you knew, you wouldn't do it.
It doesn't mean you can't learn it. I mean, I've got agronomy, professional certification. I guarantee you that growing field plants at scale by the millions is probably a little more complicated than retail. So, and I really still passionate about the plant, and this is a way to do that. And it's a business. It's just like anything else. I was kind of catching flack for it because, I'm not going to do a lot of advertising like on my personal Facebook page because it is a smoke shop and kind of in that gray area. And I am a basketball coach. But, we have people that contribute to the community that own liquor stores. And I'm personally more opposed to liquor than I am anything in this space. But to each their own. I'm not going to judge somebody on it. But so it's a business. And then we used to have rentals before COVID. And then we sold out when the housing prices went what they did. Nobody really knew if they're going to stay there. We had some older homes, and I didn't really like being in that space, in that market. And so now's, kind of looking at it going, okay, I really know the housing very well. I've got a partner and I've got a lot of relationships built in this hemp space. And so it kind of works. And I'm also kind of one of those people that just damn near knows everybody. I bought a motorcycle last week and it was down in Florida. And I kind of reached out to my personal network down there. And a friend of mine goes, yeah, I got somebody who lives 30 minutes from that. And the guy went over there and went and looked at it for me and called me on FaceTime. And pretty soon, at 2 hours later, I'm looking at the motorcycle I found online in person. It's just I guess that's my God-given talent and so they are different, but it is good to be a little diversified. So.
Yeah. And it keeps you from getting bored. And I can't see you sitting still for very long.
No, I definitely cannot do that. That's just not how I'm wired. I was looking at some different jobs when I decided to get out of farming, and we definitely realized that I'm just not built for it. It's not who I am, and so I'm really happy doing what we're doing now, and it's fun, and I'm always doing something every day and doing something different. I've got a good crew, starting to put together a pretty good crew of guys on this housing deal. We've got 6 houses slated by the end of the year, and I'm hoping we're sitting at 4 or 5 shops open, so I've got plenty of projects running.
Wow, congratulations. I'm curious, what have you done professionally that you're most proud of?
Even though it didn't necessarily pan out, being the state's largest hemp farm and really tackling that, depending on which side you want to judge me on, that's fine. It wasn't really our fault that didn't necessarily go over well, but, having the gonads, I guess, if you will, or the stupidity to take that on, because every bit of it's a learning experience. At one point we had 70, 75 temp workers showing up every day and learning what that management and getting that experience. And it was stressful. It was, not only do you have that many temp workers showing up every day, but then also you're dealing with, the variability of the plants and the weather. And so, that is pretty neat to be able to say that and put that little feather in your hat. But
absolutely. And what are you most optimistic about?
I'm very optimistic. Honestly, the housing deal, I'm really proud of that also, because right now we did a couple remodels and the houses are pretty nice. And I've had the tenants tell me we went and shopped around. We went and visited with other landlords and we liked the work that you guys were doing the best. It didn't feel like it was shot together. Didn't feel like it was half-assed, felt like you were kind of proud of it when it got done. And so I think there ought to be some pride to that people are choosing to live in homes that you're providing. And, there's going to be people that say they don't really like landlords and all that, but everybody that, whatever, we provide a service, and I feel like a good service, and, try and do a good job at it. And there's people that they're not ready to buy a home, or they're just starting out. Buying a home isn't in their cards, working on their credit, take your pick. There's 100 different reasons why someone shouldn't buy a home. If you're going to be temporary, don't buy a home. Don't get locked into one. Rent for it. It has its place. So, I feel like we're doing it right. And I'll stand by that. And I'm pretty proud of that, pretty optimistic of that space, because at least where we live and maybe other parts of the country, there haven't been a lot of homes built since the 90s. There was a big rash of homes that were built in the 50s and 70s. And then we built the McMansions in the 90s. And so there hasn't been a lot of affordable housing. Millennials now, even younger millennials, a little bit younger than me, they're ready to buy a home. They're ready to raise their families. So I know there's been the big push for the multi-apartment complexes and things like that, but a lot of people don't want to raise families in that. So I feel like, at least for us in our market and what fits me, I'm really optimistic about that. And am I going to be a billionaire? Probably not. That's not a goal. I know I won't be, because it's not a goal. But I do feel like we'll have a nice living. I'm going to provide a nice, jobs for the guys that work for us. And they're pretty proud of the fact that they feel like they're creating some solid housing. And there's a lot of pride in that.
Absolutely. I'd say you're the American dream. So where can people learn more about you, what you're up to? They might want to buy tons of houses. Where can we funnel these folks?
Well, I'll have to get back to you on that one. I'm really big on Facebook, and it's not private anymore. I used to keep it pretty locked down, and I've had, I'm in an investor group and people that are in this space, and they say, if you want people to know what you're doing, and I probably ought to get bigger on Instagram or take your pick, but beyond everything else, I got my hands full just keeping Facebook updated. So, I hope to get a website done, but right now I'm in my own little world, and we'll see where we get to from there. But
well, Cody Claflin, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Matt Balaker podcast. To learn more, please check out mattbalaker.com and encourage your friends to like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate it.